The afternoon sun hung lazily in the sky, casting long shadows over a middle-class neighborhood just outside of Atlanta. A moving truck rumbled down the quiet street, its presence an indication of new beginnings. It pulled up in front of a two-story brick home, where a station wagon and a family van were already parked in the driveway. The house, though stately, bore the unmistakable signs of recent activity, the flurry of a family settling into a new life. Two hefty movers in uniform exited the truck and headed to the back. With practiced ease, they lifted the end gate, revealing a packed cargo of furniture and personal items. Among them was a shiny blue bicycle, its metallic paint catching the sunlight. From the house emerged Mark Davidson, a 15-year-old boy with a curious look on his face. He made his way over to the truck just as one of the movers hefted the bicycle into view. "I suppose this is yours?" "Yeah, thanks. I thought it would be in the second truck. They already came in the morning." "Well, we had a little brake problem that slowed us down a bit. Sorry about that. Don't worry, we'll have it all unloaded in no time." Mark shook his head. "I wouldn't count on that. My mom had the other guys running around in circles." "I can imagine," the mover replied with a laugh. "I'm kidding. It won't be that bad. It'll be worse." With that, Mark left the movers in a state of comedic shock, his laughter lingering in the air as he headed back to the house. The movers exchanged a glance, then shrugged and got back to work. Wayne, a man in his 40s, appeared in the open doorway, a look of relief spreading across his face. "Glad to see you guys made it." The movers nodded in response, their faces breaking into smiles as Wayne's wife, Teresa, approached. She was a woman in her early 40s, her presence commanding yet warm. "I'm going to make sure everything goes where it's supposed to be. You go finish your coffee, honey." Wayne shrugged, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "All right then, it's all yours." With that, he stepped back into the house, leaving Teresa to oversee the operation. A few minutes later, she was in full swing, directing the movers with remarkable precision and punctuality. Each piece of furniture and every box found its designated spot under her watchful eye. Outside, her son Mark observed the organized chaos from the road, skillfully performing tricks on his blue bicycle. His attention soon drifted to the scene across the street where an elderly man was diligently mowing his lawn. Nearby, a girl about Mark's age was pulling weeds from the flower bed, her focus intense. Intrigued, Mark began to pedal his bike toward the house, curiosity drawing him closer to the unfamiliar faces in his new neighborhood. Mark waved as he pulled up next to the elderly man, who promptly turned off his mower. "Hello there," the man greeted warmly. "Hi, my name's Mark. My family and I are moving across the street." Mark introduced himself, trying to hide his nervousness. "Oh yes, I saw the trucks," the man said, nodding in recognition. "We're glad to have you in the neighborhood. I'm John Brandriff. Oh, and this here is Kim Thomas. She lives a few houses down. She gives me a hand with the flower bed sometimes." Mark's eyes wandered over the meticulously kept lawn and the beautiful rose bed. As he admired the flowers, a girl about his age walked up, taking off her garden gloves. She was 16, with a friendly smile that put Mark a little more at ease. "Kim, this is Mark," Mr. Brandriff introduced. "His family are our new neighbors." "Glad to meet you," Kim said, extending her hand. Mark shook her hand, nodding, clearly flustered. "Nice to meet you too." Kim glanced back at the flower bed. "Well, weeding is about done, but I think we need some Miracle Grow. A few of the roses look a little famished." Mr. Brandriff chuckled. "Well, we can't have famished roses, can we? I'm pretty sure I'm out of Miracle Grow, though." "I'd be fine going to the grow shop and getting a box," Kim offered. "All right then," Mr. Brandriff agreed, handing her a $20 bill. "Here you go. Oh, and perhaps Mark would like to go with you. Maybe you two could go for ice cream after. It's a blazing hot day and you deserve a break." Kim looked at Mark, who blushed slightly under her gaze. "Well, what do you say, Mark?" I'd love to," Mark stammered. Let me tell my dad I'm going and I'll be right back, okay?" "Sure," Kim replied with a nod and a smile. Mark got back on his bike and pedaled quickly back home, his heart racing with excitement and a touch of nervousness. Mark rode his bike up the driveway, his tires mingling with the distant sounds of the movers. His dad, Wayne, sat outside, sipping his coffee and keeping an eye on the unfolding chaos. "Dad, how's the move going?" Mark asked as he came to a stop. Wayne looked up, a tired but satisfied smile on his face. "It's going all right. What adventures have you been on?" "Well, I met one of our neighbors, the old man across the street, Mr. Brandriff." Wayne glanced over and saw Mr. Brandriff finishing up his lawn mowing while Kim was getting into her car. "And who is she? His granddaughter?" Mark shook his head. "Oh, Kim just helps him with his gardening. She lives down the street. She said she's going to go get some Miracle Grow from the store and asked me to go with her." Wayne noticed Kim waving to Mark and gave a slight smile. "All right, you both be careful." Filled with joy, Mark pedaled back across the street to the other house. Just as he was about to leave, Wayne called after him. "Mark, one more thing." Mark stopped, a hint of nervousness creeping in. "Yeah?" Wayne continued. "Perhaps you'd like to invite your new friend to Six Flags with us tomorrow?" Mark's face lit up with excitement. "Can I?" Wayne nodded. "Sure, thanks, I will." Mark pedaled off, his heart racing with excitement. He reached Kim's Volkswagen just as she pulled up to the house. He opened the door and climbed in, brimming with anticipation for the adventure ahead. Kim drove her car down the street, the wind blowing their hair back through the open windows. The sunlight streamed through the trees, creating a dappled pattern on the road. "Nice car, by the way," Mark commented, admiring the vehicle's sleek interior. "Thanks, my dad got it for me last week for my 16th birthday," Kim replied, a note of pride in her voice. "Oh, wow. Happy late birthday, I guess," Mark said. "Thanks, when's yours?" Kim asked. "Well, I turned 16 in December. My dad said I'd be getting a car too," Mark replied. "Really? What are you looking to get?" Kim asked, her curiosity piqued. Mark shrugged and grinned. "Well, I'd like a Porsche," Kim chuckled. "Wouldn't we all? But honestly, I'd be happy with anything that doesn't have pedals. Biking is good exercise, but... Yeah, so, where's your family from?" Kim inquired, steering the conversation. "Texas, Dallas, actually," Kim smiled. "Oh, so you're a cowboy?" Mark chuckled and shrugged. Sort of." "What does your dad do?" Kim inquired. "He just became a supervisor at a factory in this town. His company bought it out and they transferred him over here," Mark explained. "Oh, I see. What do they make there?" Kim continued. "Arcade tokens, stuff like that," Mark said. "Interesting. So, what's Texas like? Are there a lot of horses?" Kim asked. "A few. I kind of have an understanding with horses," Mark responded. "And what's that?" Kim asked, glancing at him. "I don't ride them, and they can't throw me off," Mark explained with a slight chuckle. Kim laughed and looked at Mark. "Oh, I love horses so much. I've always dreamed of having a giant field or a farm to ride them in and watch the sunset." "Sounds like the movies," Mark commented. "Nah, I would never want to be in those. Too unrealistic," Kim said. Mark shrugged. "Yeah, a lot of garbage, you know?" "I know, right? We should totally go to one sometime," Kim replied. Mark looked at her in comedic shock. She laughed again. "I'm just messing with you." The car pulled into the garden shop's parking lot. Kim parked the car and the two got out and entered the store, their conversation continuing to flow as they walked inside. The exhausted movers struggled to carry a large and heavy dresser through the front door of the house. Their faces were red with effort and sweat glistened on their foreheads. One of them turned to Teresa, trying to catch his breath. "Where would you like this one, ma'am?" he asked. "Upstairs, please. Third room on the right," Teresa instructed, pointing toward the staircase. The men began their slow ascent, carefully maneuvering the bulky piece of furniture. Meanwhile, Wayne entered from the kitchen, a concerned look on his face. "How's it coming?" he asked, watching the movers with a critical eye. "Slowly but surely," Teresa replied, a hint of fatigue in her voice. Wayne was about to say something more when a sudden loud crash echoed through the house. Both of them turned toward the stairs, eyes wide with alarm. They saw the thinner mover pinned under the edge of the dresser, struggling to breathe. Wayne rushed over, quickly lifting the end of the dresser off the man with a Herculean effort. "Are you okay?" Teresa asked, her voice shaking with concern. "Yeah, I'll be fine," the mover replied, though his words sounded strained. "I don't think so. Your eyes are kind of bulging," Teresa observed, worry etched on her face. The mover's speech slurred slightly. "Glaucoma is just part of the job, ma'am." Before anyone could react, the mover leaned heavily on the post of the stairwell and then collapsed unconscious. The other mover poked his head around the dresser, his expression a mix of frustration and helplessness. "Oh, that's just great," he muttered. Teresa knelt beside the fallen mover, panic rising in her chest. "He's not breathing!" The remaining mover, clearly more focused on the logistics than the emergency, shrugged. "Well, he's not much use right now. Let me call the office and get some more guys here." Wayne's face flushed with anger. "How about we call an ambulance? He needs a doctor now." Without waiting for a response, the couple rushed to the phone. Wayne dialed frantically, his fingers trembling as Teresa hovered beside him, her eyes darting between the unconscious mover and her husband. The urgency in the room was palpable, the weight of the moment pressing down on them as they waited for the call to connect, hoping help would arrive in time. Meanwhile, in the garden shop, Mark reached up and took a box of Miracle Grow off the shelf. He examined it for a moment before turning to Kim. "Mr. Brandrift's flowers looked pretty healthy already. Does he really need this stuff?" he asked, a hint of skepticism in his voice. Kim smiled, shaking her head slightly. It really helps. You have no idea. It gives them so many more essential nutrients that really help them grow. You could say it's a miracle. Mark laughed at her pun, his laughter echoing in the quiet aisle. Kim looked at him curiously. What's so funny? She asked, grinning. Well, you'd be a great salesperson for Miracle Grow, Mark replied, still chuckling. It works! What can I say? Kim said with a shrug, joining in the laughter. Their shared amusement carried them to the checkout, their conversation and laughter blending seamlessly as they made their way through the store. Later, Kim's car came to a stop at a red light. Both she and Mark were enjoying ice cream cones, the sweet treat a pleasant end to their errand. Oh, I almost forgot to tell you, Mark began, licking a drip of ice cream before it could reach his hand. I'm heading to Six Flags tomorrow with my parents. I was wondering if you'd like to come with us. Kim's face lit up with pleasant surprise. Oh, really? That would be awesome. Just let me ask my parents first and I'll let you know. Mark smiled, feeling a warm sense of excitement. All right, sounds good. As they continued down the road and approached Mark's house, their conversation trailed off when they noticed an ambulance parked in front. The flashing lights cast an eerie glow over the scene. What's going on? Kim asked, her brow furrowing with concern. They watched as ambulance technicians emerged from the house, carefully guiding the injured mover on a stretcher. What in the world? Mark muttered, his ice cream suddenly forgotten. They quickly got out of the car and rushed inside, their hearts pounding with worry and confusion. Mark and Kim headed inside just as the other mover was on the phone. Wayne and Teresa were sitting on the sofa, their faces tense but calm. Mark rushed over to them, his concern evident. Are you okay? He asked, his voice filled with worry. Wayne nodded. Yes, we're okay. One of the movers lost his balance and fell down the stairs. His eyes looked really bad too, Mark said, recalling the unsettling sight. The other mover briefly looked up from his phone. Glaucoma kid, it's fine. He'll be fine. Teresa shook her head, clearly still shaken. Mark turned to Kim, introducing her. Oh, this is Kim. She lives down the street. I've invited her to Six Flags with us tomorrow. Teresa smiled warmly at Kim. That would be just fine, Kim. We'd love to have you. Kim smiled back, feeling welcomed. Thank you. I'd have to check with my parents first, but I'd love to go. Teresa nodded, noticing the box of Miracle Grow still in Kim's hands. Well, I'd better go and finish working on Mr. Brandrift's roses before dark, Kim said. Teresa reached out her hand. It was very nice meeting you, Kim. Kim reciprocated the handshake. Nice meeting you too, Mr. and Mrs. Davidson. Welcome to the neighborhood. Wayne smiled. Hope to see you tomorrow. Kim smiled and walked away with Mark by her side. As they approached her car, Mark asked, Hey, do you need any help with the roses? Oh, I'll be fine, thanks though, Kim replied. She opened her car door and got in, then rolled down the window. Hey, Mark, I'm glad you and your family moved into the neighborhood. You guys seem really nice. Mark shrugged modestly. Most of the time, Kim chuckled and smiled. Well, I'll call you tonight. Take care. Mark waved goodbye as she drove away, then briefly leaped into the air, punching his fist in victory. Yes! Overjoyed, Mark headed back to the house, his heart light with the promise of new friendships and adventures. That evening, Wayne, Teresa, and their son Mark sat around the dinner table, enjoying their first meal in their new home. The room was filled with the comforting aroma of home-cooked food, a welcome change after a long day of moving. I'm glad the movers were able to get all our things moved today, Wayne said, breaking the silence. Went off without a hitch. Well, almost. Teresa shook her head, her expression concerned. That poor man, though. I hope he's okay. He didn't look too good, Dad, Mark added, his voice tinged with worry. Wayne sighed, setting down his fork. Well, I'm sure the doctors will do as much as they possibly can. He paused, looking at Mark. Oh, has Kim called you yet? She coming tomorrow? Mark was about to answer when his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and smiled. There she is. He took his phone and left the room, his parents exchanging a knowing smile as they watched him go. Mark answered his phone with a quick swipe. Hello? Hi, Mark, it's Kim. Everything still on for tomorrow? Kim's voice came through, clear and cheerful. As far as I know, definitely. We'll be leaving around 9 a.m. Can you come? Well, my mom wants to speak to your mother for a minute. Is she there? Mark turned back toward the dining room where his parents were finishing their meal. He motioned for his mother, who rose from her seat and walked over to him. He handed her the phone. This is Mrs. Davidson. Yes, how are you doing? Teresa said, her voice warm as she began the conversation. Meanwhile, at Kim's house, her mother, a woman in her mid-40s, was on the other end of the phone. Oh, I'm doing fine. I'm Kathy. Kathy Thomas, she said warmly. If we had known you were moving in today, I would have offered to help you unpack. Teresa smiled, even though Kathy couldn't see it. Oh, don't worry about that. We're doing just fine. That's very good to hear. I just wanted to ask. Your family is going to Six Flags a day after moving? Surely you're tremendously busy and tired from moving. Well, my husband promised Mark he would take him, and he's going back to work Monday. So, unpacking can wait, Teresa explained, a hint of amusement in her voice. Well, whenever you need a hand, let me know. Oh, also, Kim mentioned there was an accident with the movers. Yes, unfortunately one of the movers lost his balance and had a fall, Teresa said, her voice growing somber. Mark glanced toward the dining room where Wayne was finishing his dinner with a satisfied look on his face. The phone conversation continued, Teresa answering Kathy's last question. Oh, we'd love to have Kim with us. Mark is really looking forward to having someone to ride with him. Yes, 9 a.m. We'll be glad to come by and pick her up. Sounds good. Look forward to seeing her in the morning. Okay, good night. Teresa hung up and handed the phone back to Mark. Everything's all set. We'll pick her up in the morning. Mark gave his mom a hug, joy radiating from him. Wayne joined them, wrapping an arm around both of them, sharing in the moment of family togetherness. The next morning, Wayne locked the front door as Mark and Teresa settled into the car. Wayne walked up and got into the driver's seat. All set? He asked, looking back at his family. Teresa nodded. Think so? I think I turned everything off, I hope. Mark rolled his eyes. Yes, Mom, everything's off. Let's go. With a chuckle, Wayne started the car, and they pulled out of the driveway, heading off. A few moments later, they arrived at Kim's house. Mark got out and knocked on the door. Kim came out joyfully and joined them in the car as they set off for Six Flags. Once at Six Flags, the day unfolded in a whirlwind of fun. Mark and Kim had a great time on roller coasters and other rides, their laughter filling the air. A short time later, they ran to get into a red bumper car. Wayne and Teresa scrambled to find an empty one to join them. Over here, Wayne called, waving Teresa over. She ran to him and hopped in. A comedic battle ensued between the kids and Wayne and Teresa, all of them laughing during the chaotic fun. The group later enjoyed more rides and attractions, concluding with a ride on Z-Force, a massive roller coaster and the main attraction. Mark and Kim went alone as Mark's parents flopped on a bench to rest. As the coaster reached the top of its incline, Mark looked at Kim. In a moment of passion, he kissed her. Kim smiled at him before the coaster dipped down, both of them screaming as their hair blew in the wind. Late that night, the group exited a tram as they got to the parking lot. As they drove off, Kim started a conversation. I really enjoyed today with all of you. Thanks for inviting me. You're very welcome, Kim, Wayne replied. We enjoyed having you, and I'm sure Mark did too, Teresa added with a knowing smile. Mark gave Kim a hug. I couldn't think of anyone I'd rather be with. A while later, they arrived back at Kim's house. She exited the car and waved back at the group. See you tomorrow, Mark. You bet, Mark waved back with a smile. Kim entered the house as the family headed home, the joy of the day's adventures still fresh in their minds. About 10 days later, Wayne was sitting in his recliner in the living room, engrossed in a newspaper after coming home from work. The soft rustle of the pages filled the quiet room. Mark came downstairs, his steps light as he approached his dad. Hey Dad, would you mind if I showed Kim the factory? Mark asked, standing by the recliner. Wayne looked up from his newspaper, raising an eyebrow. Sure, son. But why would she want to see it? Well, it'll be fun. Besides, I kind of want to brag on your work a little, Mark replied, a hint of pride in his voice. Wayne grinned, reaching into his pocket to pull out some keys. He tossed them to Mark. Don't exaggerate too much now. Catching the keys, Mark smiled. As he was about to leave, Wayne called after him. Hey Mark, make sure to lock up after you guys leave. Okay, I will. Thanks, Dad, Mark replied, heading out and closing the front door behind him. A few minutes later, Mark arrived at Kim's house. He found her in the driveway washing her car. The sun glinted off the soapy water as she worked. Hey Kim, Mark called out, walking up to her. Want to have a look around my dad's factory? There's a lot of interesting stuff in there. Kim looked up from her task, her face lighting up. Sure, let me rinse the car off real quick. Mark waited as Kim finished rinsing the car, her efficient movements sending arcs of water glittering in the sunlight. Kim's car came to a stop in front of a large manufacturing plant. She and Mark got out, and Kim glanced around the imposing building, her eyes wide with curiosity. So, this is it, huh? Kim asked, taking in the exterior. This is it, Mark confirmed, a grin spreading across his face. Just wait until you see inside. He took the key from his pocket and unlocked the door. As they stepped in, darkness engulfed them. I can't see a thing in here, Kim said, squinting into the blackness. Hold on, let me find the light switch. Oh, here it is, Mark replied. He flipped the switch and the lights flickered on, revealing a massive factory full of machines, presses, computers, and various other industrial equipment. Oh, wow, this place is huge, Kim exclaimed, her voice echoing slightly in the vast space. That's for sure. There are like 70-something guys that work here. My dad has a lot of responsibility, Mark explained, pride evident in his tone. You said they make tokens for arcades and stuff, right? Kim asked, wandering closer to one of the machines. Yep. They also make all kinds of medallions, souvenir coins, and other things. Trinkets, decorations, anything you could mold, cast, forge, or whatever else they can think of, Mark said, following her. Interesting. Maybe you could show me how it's made? Kim suggested, her eyes sparkling with interest. Mark chuckled. You mean like the TV show? Kim shrugged. Something like that? Well, let's see, I could show you how they make tokens, Mark said, scratching his chin thoughtfully. Awesome. Could we get something to drink first? You guys have a vending machine or... Kim's voice trailed off as she glanced around. Oh, sure. There's one around the corner, Mark said. They walked over to the vending machine and Mark started digging in his pockets for some money. His face fell when he came up short. You wouldn't happen to have a quarter on you, would you? Mark asked, clearly embarrassed. Kim shook her head. No, I didn't bring any money with me. Well, there's a water fountain the guys sometimes drop change in. Let's check, Mark suggested, trying to hide his disappointment. As they headed toward the water fountain, Kim started laughing. Mark turned to her, puzzled. What's so funny? I was just thinking, we're in a factory that makes all kinds of coins and tokens and stuff, and here we are trying to find a darn quarter, Kim explained between giggles. Mark chuckled as he pondered for a moment. You know what? I have an idea. Come this way. Kim followed Mark into another room in the factory, where several boxes and crates were stacked alongside some stamping machines. Mark opened one of the boxes, revealing it was full of small circular metal discs. What is all this? Kim asked, peering into the box. You wanted to see how we made tokens. Well, if I know anything about how we make them, we have these disc things, Mark explained. My dad calls them blanks. What if I tell the machine to make a copy of a quarter instead of a token? Kim looked at Mark with worried hesitation. Mark? Wouldn't that be counterfeiting? Which is, illegal? I mean, maybe technically speaking. But it's not like we're hurting anybody. I'm just making a couple for us to get a couple of Cokes, that's all, Mark said with a shrug. Kim sighed. Well, I guess. So, how are you going to do it? Mark took one of the only quarters in his pocket and inserted it into a soft mold imprinter. He pushed a few buttons on the screen until it compressed a perfect imprint of the coin. The mold fed the data into another machine, which took a metal blank and cut it down to scale. Kim watched, amazed by how intricate and precise the process was. As it worked, the machine made a loud humming noise while it cut away material. Mark took her over to the other side of the machine as 3 new quarters slid out into a bin. Kim reached out to pick one up, but quickly pulled her hand back, realizing it was extremely hot. Oops, I should have mentioned, the metal is really hot from the cutting. Sorry, Mark said, wincing. Yeah, that'll take your fingerprints right off, Kim replied, shaking her hand. Normally the machine lets the coins set for a bit while they travel through the rest of the process, but since we're only making 3, I didn't think it was necessary to turn the rest of this stuff on, Mark explained. He reached for one of the quarters and carefully picked it up. It was still warm, but not as hot. Whew! Mark took the fake coin and compared it to the quarter he used in the molding process. See? They're extremely close, actually, Kim observed, leaning in to inspect the coins. Yeah, let's see if it works, Mark said, a grin spreading across his face. They came around the corner to the vending machine and Mark dropped his quarters into the slot. Sure enough, out came a cold can of Coke. Mark was ecstatic and handed it to Kim. It worked! You're kind of a criminal mastermind, Mark, Kim said, her eyes sparkling with a mix of admiration and amusement. Mark shrugged. Not really. Anyone could have done it. So, why don't they? Seriously, all people ever do is counterfeit dollar bills and stuff, Kim pondered, her curiosity piqued. Yeah, and they all get caught, Mark replied matter-of-factly. Kim was strangely intrigued. Why do you think that is? They started walking down the hallway as Mark explained his thoughts. Well, there are a few reasons I can think of. There's a special ink they use that's really exclusive, apparently. Also, they serialize all the bills. Oh, and people who try to print money always get greedy and print tons of $100 bills. That makes sense. It would get them a lot of attention, Kim said, nodding. So, what about quarters? Mark paused, thinking deeply before answering. I don't think so. They don't have serial numbers. The only problem I can think of is, wouldn't it be kind of suspicious if a business took in like hundreds of thousands of quarters a day? Kim shrugged. Well, depends on what business. Vending machines take a lot of coins. Yeah, and I guess some other things too. Wait, what are you suggesting? Mark asked, his pace slowing as he processed her words. Well, it kind of seems like a get-rich-life hack to me, Kim said, her eyes twinkling with excitement. I mean, I don't know. Mark trailed off, still unsure. You know, I've always wanted to travel. Hawaii, France, lots of places I've never been able to go. We could do a lot of good in this world if we just had the money, Kim said, her voice filled with dreamy enthusiasm as she walked around the machines. Well, maybe, Mark replied, looking at Kim's starry-eyed expression. It's worth a try, don't you think? I mean, we could start a business together if we make enough from this. On the side, of course, and just between us, Kim suggested, her tone turning conspiratorial. Well, we'd have to make a lot of quarters, Mark pointed out, still hesitant but warming to the idea. How many can this thing make? Kim asked, motioning to the machine. Well, this machine is kind of slow. It's for specialty coins. Let me check that other machine, Mark said, walking over to a much larger machine clearly geared toward bulk production with a series of molds and automated cutting tools inside. He checked one of the computers and said, it can make about 1,000 a minute. Kim's smile widened. Well, what are we waiting for? Mark smiled as he went over to the other machine, taking out the disc with the data for the quarter mold. He popped it into the larger machine and turned it on. A massive vat of metal blanks flowed into the machine as it set the blanks for cutting. Well, how many should we make? Mark asked. Kim shrugged. How about 1 billion? Mark laughed. That would be nice, but how the heck are we going to get our $250 million out of here? Coins are pretty darn heavy. Kim considered for a moment. Well, how many do you think we should? Mark thought for a minute. Well, if we make 100,000, that would be $25,000. We would probably be able to start something from that. We could make more as we need them. Sounds like a plan. How long should this take? Kim asked. Couple of hours, Mark replied. My parents will be expecting me home in about an hour, Kim said, a hint of worry in her voice. Mark shook his head. Well, how about this? We both go home and pretend to go to bed, then we sneak out and meet up. Say at 11 p.m. or something, then we can be done before the workers come in the morning. Kim smiled. You've got it. One more thing. Mark picked up one of the larger blanks along with the key to the plant. Might as well make our own key while we're at it. Kim chuckled. You're just full of surprises, aren't you? Mark grinned. Let's get out of here. See you at 11. They both headed out, Kim locking the door behind them. Mark's heart raced with a mix of excitement and trepidation as they left the factory. He couldn't believe they were actually doing this. This could be their big break.